3 years ago, I spent more money than I probably should have on a road that nobody but me was ever supposed to use. And somehow, without asking my permission or signing a single piece of paper, that little stretch of pavement almost turned into the busiest shortcut for commercial trucks in the county. The funny thing is, if you'd driven past my property back then, you would have thought I was the luckiest guy in Western Oregon. My place sat just outside the little farming community of Pine Hollow, far enough from town that you could hear coyotes some nights, but close enough that I could haul equipment into town whenever I needed. I wasn't trying to build some grand estate. I just wanted a quiet place where I could work on restoring old tractors, keep my hay dry, and enjoy the kind of mornings where the loudest sound was usually a hawk circling over the fields. The only problem was getting to my equipment barn every winter. Every year, after the rain settled in, the dirt lane across my pasture turned into soup. Doesn't matter whether I drove my pickup, my skid steer, or even the ATV. Everything left deep ruts that took weeks to smooth back out once spring arrived. After fighting that battle for nearly a decade, I finally said enough is enough. I hired a local contractor named Eric Collins, somebody I'd known since high school, and together we planned a quarter-mile private access road from the county road straight back to my storage barn. We did everything by the book: county permits, drainage approval, soil inspection, survey markers. Every signature the county wanted, I gave them. When construction finished, I remember standing there with a cup of coffee watching the asphalt steam under the cool morning air. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't some expensive driveway with decorative stone walls. It was simply mine, built with my savings, sitting entirely on land listed in my deed, with absolutely no public easement attached to it. Eric laughed as he packed up his equipment and slapped the hood of my truck. "Well, Caleb," he said, "you've got yourself a road that'll probably outlive both of us." I smiled and said, "As long as I'm the only idiot driving on it, I'll be happy." Turns out, I couldn't have been more wrong. The first surprise came on a damp Tuesday morning in early March. I was replacing a hydraulic hose on my old Massey Ferguson tractor when I heard something that absolutely didn't belong out there. Air brakes, loud ones. I looked up expecting maybe a delivery truck stopping on the county road. Instead, an 18-wheeler refrigerated trailer was rolling directly across my property like he'd been invited. I actually froze for a second because my brain refused to process what I was looking at. That truck weighed close to 80,000 pounds fully loaded, and it was casually cruising toward my barn. I jogged out waving both arms until the driver slowed to a stop. He rolled his window down, looking more confused than annoyed. "Everything all right?" he asked. I pointed toward the pavement beneath him. "Buddy, this is private property." He blinked a couple of times, then held up the GPS mounted beside a steering wheel. "Dispatch route. Says this is the fastest connection to Highway 14. I actually laughed because I assumed he was joking. "No, that's impossible. This road literally didn't exist a few years ago." He shrugged with that tired look truck drivers get after a long shift. "I'm just following the route they gave me." I couldn't even be mad at him. He wasn't trying to trespass. As far as he knew, technology had already done the thinking for him. He backed the truck out carefully, apologized twice, and disappeared toward the highway. I figured that was the end of it. It wasn't. The very next morning, another truck showed up. Different company, different driver, same GPS. 2 days later, another one, then another. By the second week, I'd stopped being surprised every time I heard diesel engines echoing across my pasture. That's when I called one of the freight companies directly. After sitting through 15 minutes of automated menus, I finally reached a dispatcher. "Ma'am," I said as politely as I could, "your drivers keep entering my private road because their GPS says it's a shortcut. Somebody needs to remove it from your routing system." She barely paused before answering. "Sir, if that's what the navigation software is displaying, that's a mapping issue, not a company issue." I remember staring at the phone wondering if I'd heard her correctly. "Except your trucks are the ones damaging my property." Another pause. Then, in the flattest voice imaginable, she replied, "We'll make a note of your concern." The call ended less than a minute later. I stood there looking out toward the road, telling myself maybe she'd actually file the report. Maybe somebody would fix it within a few days. Maybe this would all turn into one of those funny stories you laugh about over barbecue with your neighbors. I had no idea that instead of disappearing, those trucks were only just beginning to arrive. Over the next few weeks, My quiet little road started looking less like private property and more like the loading dock behind a warehouse. Some mornings I'd count 2 trucks before breakfast. Other days I'd be welding in the barn and hear another diesel engine rumbling across my land every couple of hours. They came hauling refrigerated food, lumber, bottled water, landscaping supplies, even livestock feed once. Different logos, different drivers, same confused expression whenever I stepped outside waving them down. I started recognizing the routine. The driver would glance at the GPS, then at me, then back at the GPS like one of us had to be wrong. Most of them apologized. A couple even laughed awkwardly and admitted they had wondered why a commercial route suddenly cut through what looked like somebody's pasture. One older driver named Frank leaned out his window and said, "Son, if this is private land, somebody's computer made a real expensive mistake." At the time I thought he was exaggerating. He wasn't. By early summer, I was seeing 9 to 12 commercial trucks every single week. It didn't sound like much until you realized each one weighed several dozen tons. Asphalt is strong when it's built for the traffic it's designed to carry, but my road had been engineered for pickups, tractors, and the occasional equipment trailer, not an endless parade of loaded 18-wheelers. The shoulder started crumpling first. Then, hairline cracks spread outward from the tire tracks. Near the entrance to my equipment barn, there was a section where the ground stayed slightly softer after rain, and every heavy truck that drifted a little too close compressed it further. Before long, the edge of the pavement had begun sinking almost an inch. Eric, the contractor who built the road, stopped by one afternoon after seeing fresh tire marks. He walked the length of the damaged shoulder without saying much, then crouched down and ran his hand across one of the cracks. "These aren't weather cracks," he finally said. "This is weight damage." I asked him the question I already knew the answer to. "Can it be fixed?" He nodded slowly. "Sure." Then he handed me an estimate that came out to just over $6,500. I stared at the number for a long moment. It wasn't just the money. It was the idea that I'd be paying to repair damage caused by people who shouldn't have been there in the first place. That was the afternoon something shifted in my head. Up until then, I'd been trying to solve the problem by being reasonable. Phone calls, emails, polite conversations, giving companies the benefit of the doubt. But reasonable only works when the other side is paying attention. So I stopped asking and started documenting. I installed 2 high-definition cameras overlooking the road. I upgraded the security system around the barn so every vehicle crossing the property received a time-stamped recording from multiple angles. I bought a notebook that quickly turned into a spreadsheet on my laptop. Every truck got logged. Company name, trailer number, license plate, date, direction of travel, weather conditions, whether I had spoken to the driver, whether fresh damage appeared afterward. My neighbors started teasing me about becoming the county's unofficial traffic department. My closest neighbor, Walt, wandered over one evening carrying 2 cold beers. We sat on the tailgate of my pickup watching another semi disappear toward the county road. He shook his head and said, "You know, if somebody drove across my pasture like that every week, I'd have already dropped boulders across the entrance." I laughed. "Believe me, I thought about it, so why don't you?" he asked. I took a sip before answering. Because the first headline would read, "Property owner traps truck." Nobody would ask why the truck was there in the first place. Walt smiled. Fair point, deep down, though I was frustrated in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't really about the road anymore. It was about watching complete strangers slowly normalize using something I'd worked years to build. Every fresh set of tire marks felt like somebody quietly helping themselves to my property while expecting me to smile about it. The companies kept insisting it wasn't their responsibility because the computers chose the route. But computers don't file deeds. Computers don't buy asphalt. Computers don't pay repair bills. Somewhere, a human being had allowed my private road to become part of a commercial routing network, and nobody seemed interested in figuring out how. That question started bothering me more than the damage itself. So one Saturday morning, I drove down to the county records office. The clerk recognized me because I'd handled all the permits there a few years earlier. When I explained why I was there, she frowned immediately. "That's strange," she said. "Your access road has always been recorded as private." Together, we pulled up the parcel maps, permit history, and property records. Everything on the county side looked exactly as it should. Private ownership, no easements, no public dedication, nothing unusual. I thanked her and drove home even more confused than before. If the county still listed my road correctly, Why did every commercial navigation system think it belonged to the public? That night, I started digging through online mapping databases. One website showed the road as unnamed private access. Another barely acknowledged it existed. But then I found something that made my stomach tighten. One commercial logistics database had my road highlighted as an approved connector between County Road 8 and Highway 14. Not private, not restricted. Commercial access corridor. I refreshed the page 3 times because I honestly thought it had to be a glitch. It wasn't. The designation was sitting right there in black and white, as if somebody had intentionally classified my personal driveway as freight infrastructure. The next Monday, I made an appointment with a property attorney in Salem named Rachel Bennett. She spent almost an hour reviewing my deed, permit records, photographs, contractor invoices, and traffic log. She barely spoke until she reached the mapping printout. Then she leaned back in her chair and looked directly at me. "Caleb," she said quietly, "this isn't just a GPS mistake anymore." I asked what she meant. She slid the paper across the desk. "Somebody entered your road into a commercial logistics database. Once that happened, the information propagated to third-party mapping providers. Every routing algorithm downstream trusted the original classification. So they accidentally turned my road into public infrastructure?" I asked. She shook her head. "Not legally." She tapped my deed with her pen. "Legally, this remains private property. But operationally," she paused for emphasis, "they've created the appearance of a commercial easement that doesn't exist." I remember feeling both relieved and angry at the same time. Relieved because I wasn't imagining things. Angry because this had gone far beyond a few lost truck drivers following bad directions. Rachel continued, "If commercial carriers rely on this information long enough without being challenged, companies begin treating the route as established access. That creates real financial damage for you and potentially much larger legal problems down the road." I leaned back and let that sink in. Months of ignored phone calls suddenly made sense. Nobody had been fixing a simple navigation error because somewhere inside the logistics industry, my road had already become accepted as fact. Rachel smiled slightly and closed the folder. "The good news," she said, "is you've documented absolutely everything." I asked her what happened next. She looked at me with the kind of confidence you only see in people who've handled these fights before. "Now," she said, "we stop asking nicely, and we start speaking a language corporate legal departments actually understand." Rachel moved quickly. Instead of sending another polite email that would disappear into somebody's inbox, she assembled what she called a complete damages package. It included the original county permits, certified copies of my recorded deed, the contractor's repair estimate, hundreds of time-stamped photographs, security camera footage, my traffic spreadsheet, and printouts showing exactly how my private road had been classified inside the commercial routing database. She even included a timeline documenting every phone call I'd made asking companies to stop using my property long before any legal action became necessary. At the very end sat a demand letter requesting just over $14,000 for road repairs, loss of use, legal expenses, and the unauthorized commercial use of private property. "We're giving them one opportunity to fix this voluntarily," Rachel told me as she slid the envelope across her desk. "If they ignore it, we'll file." For the first week, nothing. No emails, no phone calls, no letters. The trucks, however, became noticeably fewer. Instead of seeing them almost every day, I'd go 2 or 3 days without hearing a single diesel engine. That alone told me somebody, somewhere inside the company, had finally started paying attention. Then the silence stretched into a second week. By the third week, I honestly figured we'd end up in court. One Friday afternoon, my phone rang while I was replacing fence posts along the back pasture. The caller ID showed a corporate office number I'd never seen before. I answered, expecting another customer service representative reading from a script. Instead, a calm voice introduced himself as Daniel Mercer, Regional Operations Director for Summit Logistics Network, the company responsible for managing the routing database used by several freight carriers in the region. His tone was completely different from the conversations I'd had months earlier. There was no dismissiveness, no excuses, no attempt to pretend nothing had happened. "Mr. Pyre, Dawson," he began, "I've personally reviewed the documentation provided by your attorney. First, I'd like to apologize for how the situation was handled." I didn't interrupt. I simply listened. He continued, "An internal review determined that your private access road was incorrectly imported during a commercial mapping update nearly 2 years ago. Once that data entered our logistics platform, it was syndicated to multiple third-party navigation providers. Unfortunately, every carrier relying on those services inherited the same error. I finally asked the question that had been sitting in my mind for months. So one bad database entry sent dozens of trucks across private property? There was a long pause before he answered quietly, "Yes, that's essentially what happened." Hearing those words didn't make me feel victorious. If anything, it was unsettling how much damage a simple digital mistake could create when nobody bothered to verify it. Daniel then got to the point. "We'd like to resolve this without litigation." Rachel had prepared me for that possibility, so I simply replied, "You'll need to speak with my attorney." They did. Negotiations moved surprisingly fast after that. Within a few days, both sides reached an agreement. They would pay $11,000, immediately remove my road from every commercial routing database under their control, submit correction requests to the third-party mapping companies that had copied the error, and formally acknowledge in writing that no commercial access rights had ever existed across my property. The settlement also required future carriers working through their logistics network to receive updated routing instructions, along with a cease and desist provision preventing any further commercial use of my road without my written permission. Rachel smiled when she called with the final paperwork. "Congratulations," she said. "Your road officially belongs to you again." A week later, I watched the last incorrect map listing disappear from the navigation apps one by one. Then something almost magical happened. Nothing. Morning after morning, I walked outside with my coffee, and instead of hearing air brakes echo across the pasture, I heard birds again. The shoulders of the road stopped getting chewed up. Fresh tire tracks disappeared. The quiet I'd built that road for finally came back. A few months later, Eric stopped by to check on another project. He stood there looking down the empty stretch of pavement and laughed. "Looks like it's finally serving its original purpose." I smiled and said, "Funny how much work it took just to keep people from using something that was never theirs." He nodded. "Sometimes ownership isn't about building something. It's about proving you're willing to defend it." That line stayed with me. Looking back now, I don't really blame the truck drivers. Most of them were hardworking people simply trusting the technology in front of them. My real frustration was with the system that allowed convenience to replace verification, and with the companies that ignored the problem until someone placed undeniable evidence in front of them. If I'd accepted the damage as just one of those things, that road might still be carrying freight traffic today. Instead, patience, documentation, and a good attorney accomplished what anger never could. The settlement money repaired the pavement, but the bigger victory was making sure one careless digital mistake didn't quietly rewrite the boundaries of private property. So now I'm curious, if you were in my position, would you have blocked the road immediately, taken the company to court from day one, or handled it the same way I did by documenting everything before making your move? Let me know down in the comments because I'd genuinely like to hear how you would have dealt with it. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes property rights should actually mean something. Until next time, thanks for watching.